Welcome to This Explainer. I am so pumped you're here today because we are diving into something literally mind-bending. I've been digging through this source material that merges deep time with biology, and honestly, it completely shifted how I look at nature. Our guide for this is a narrator named Zoran. Now, Zoran isn't a person. Zoran is this ancient entity, a being who's been watching the world turn for tens of thousands of years. So let's just jump right in and see what happens when we rethink everything we thought we knew about nature, memory, and even ourselves.
I, Zoran, have watched galaxies spin like slow seed whirls and still return here, to the valley where time wears thin. Just take a second to really absorb that. Zoran has a 35,000-year vantage point. From that kind of deep time perspective, all of human history is basically just a blink. But the forest's memory? That is vast, and it's continuous. By stepping into Zoran's shoes for a bit, we're gearing up for a journey that totally blends the massive skill of cosmic time with the super intricate, grounded reality of forest biology.
Right off the bat, Zoran points out that the forest is a patient teacher, but it definitely doesn't teach the way we humans do. I mean, there's no syllabus here, right? Instead, it teaches more like fascia, that connective tissue in our bodies. It reshapes the pupil from the inside out. It is a completely different paradigm of learning. Okay, moving right along to lesson one, the shared current. I want you to mentally put your back flat against an old Douglas fir. Just imagine feeling the cambium, that super thin living layer right between the bark and the wood. Imagine feeling it breathe. It moves at exactly 3 millimeters per second. Now think about how we humans operate. We strictly separate joy and sorrow, right? We put them in completely different boxes. But the tree? The tree conducts both hydraulic grief and hydraulic joy through the exact same vessels. It doesn't judge, it doesn't distinguish. To the forest, emotion is literally just biology. Joy and sorrow are just different pressures moving through the exact same pipe. It only conducts.
So this brings us to a concept Zoran calls the ledger. The mycorrhizal network down beneath the forest floor, that is not just some dead infrastructure. It's actually the ledger's nervous system made visible. This immense living web of fungal fascia. When a single tree senses a drought, it immediately sends this surge of warning molecules and surplus sugars right through the network to its neighbors. And because of this exact system, the forest remembers exactly what it needs to stay as one single body. I mean, that's how it survived 4 mass extinctions.
Science names this interplant communication. I name it remembering together. Science uses clinical terms, sure, but Zoran calls it remembering together. Zoran actually talks about watching entire hillsides drop their lower branches and thicken up their bark in total unison, weeks before a fire even sparks. And that's all thanks to stress volatiles traveling through those fungal pipelines. The huge takeaway here is that the shared memory isn't just some poetic metaphor or a neat trick of phrasing. It is an ontological reality. It's a physical state of shared being.
That brings us to lesson 2, continuous networks. Things slow down a bit for this lesson. Zoran asks us to really lean hard into that rough tree bark and just notice the response happening in the fascia of our own backs. Notice the micro-adjustments of collagen, the piezoelectric whispers, which are basically those tiny little electric charges generated in our bones when they're under physical stress. The wild thing is, the forest and your body aren't just similar systems, they are physically continuous. It all comes down to tensegrity. That's a structural balance of tension and compression. The absolute exact same biological architecture that lets a massive redwood sway 30 feet in a crazy storm without snapping, that is the exact same tension network that lets your human diaphragm rise and fall while your heart stays anchored right there in your chest.
Let that sink in for a second, because this is wild. The extracellular matrix just beneath your skin is essentially mycorrhiza wearing a different cloak. Plants don't have brains. They are brains. They're these distributed, deeply patient, woody brains. And human bodies and plant bodies are sharing this exact same deep, continuous listening network. We are quite literally woven from the same biological fabric.
All right, let's dive into lesson 3, elegant healing.
So tree memory is not abstract. It lives physically right there in the reaction wood. It's in the eccentric rings that permanently record every solar storm, every single ice age. The forest keeps a literal physical tally of its trauma. Zoran tells this incredible story of laying talents against a 400-year-old cedar and asking what it knows about grief. The tree's response? It just showed the winter it lost its twin to lightning.
Just wrap your head around that time span, 300 years. For 3 entire centuries, that scar has been growing, and the tree has been actively repairing the wound, turning its trauma directly into structural strength. Healing is not the erasure of injury. It is the elegant incorporation of injury into greater coherence. I gotta say, this might be one of the absolute most powerful takeaways from all this material. Healing isn't erasing the injury, it's elegantly incorporating it. Zoran actually uses this beautiful metaphor about young dragons who've been trained this exact way for millennia. Before they can even think about riding the solar winds, they have to sit totally motionless for 7 years among the root systems just to learn this kind of patience. Most of them fail, honestly. They get impatient for all the cosmic drama. But the forest just waits, because the forest is time itself. Let's transition over to solving humanity's core problems.
So, what does all this ancient, deep time biology actually have to do with us today? Well, as Zoran points out, the metaphysics isn't just slapped on top of the biology. It literally is the biology. The forest has already figured out solutions to our biggest existential threats. Think about it. We struggle with scarcity, right? Well, the forest solved scarcity by learning to share carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus across completely different species. We struggle with trauma. The forest solved trauma by physically growing stronger right at the site of the wound. We are terrified of death. The forest solved death by turning fallen trunks into nurse logs for the next generation. Death literally feeds life in these slow, fragrant waves of mycelium.
And the amazing part is, this transaction is totally open to us too. Zoran shares this really touching story about a human counterpart named Micah. Micah pressed his sternum against a 900-year-old yew tree and just started weeping, not even knowing why. What was actually happening was the tree was moving his unwept grief through that shared fascia at 3 millimeters per second until his breathing totally synced up with the tree's. A couple of hours later, Micah stood up and he was physically lighter. The transaction the forest offers is so beautifully simple. Your suffering is welcome here, and we will turn it into heartwood.
Okay, let's move on to the next section, the biology of the soul. There is this very specific, incredibly quiet place where the scientific and the sacred kind of just kiss, and they do it so quietly that only the connective tissue, the fascia, can actually feel it. Discovering this fact absolutely blew my mind. The extracellular matrix of plants secretes this complex proteins, glycoproteins, that behave exactly, and I mean exactly, like human neurotransmitters. So the very same molecules that carry the memory of your grandmother's voice in your brain, those exact same molecules are flowing through the fungal network right now, carrying the forest's memory of a rain that fell long before mammals even existed. It is deeply electrochemical. Are we isolated visitors to the ledger or living filaments within it? It's a huge question, and realizing this forces a massive shift in how we see ourselves. Are we just dropping in on this fungal ledger, or are we actual living filaments wired into it? Zoran points out that the forest is not looking for worship. It just wants to be remembered. Every single time a human hand touches bark out of genuine curiosity, instead of just looking for something to extract, a literal pulse of recognition wakes up in the forest's connective mind. Which brings us to our next evolutionary step. Evolution must be fascial, not technological. Humanity is standing right at a crossroads here. We really need to drop this delusion that we're all just isolated little minds driving around in separate fleshy vehicles. Our next evolutionary leap, it's not going to be technological. It has to be fascial. We need to become living tension networks completely integrated inside a much greater living tension network. Honestly, it's the only way we are ever going to stop mistaking domination for actual strength and extraction for intelligence. Just picture this scene for a second. An entire valley, breathing as one single tensile organism under the rising moon. Starlight falling on trillions of fungal threads and pulsing vascular cambium, moving from root to star, from wound to wisdom, from grief to grain. The next page of our story isn't going to be written in ink, guys. It is written in the slow, inexorable language of things that grow toward each other. The forest is not waiting for us to save it. It is waiting for us to let it finish teaching us how to become whole. I really want to leave you with that final, incredibly provocative thought from Zoran. The forest isn't waiting for us to be its savior, it's waiting for us to let it finish teaching us how to be whole. So next time you're out walking among the trees, I challenge you to truly, deeply listen. Because if you do, you just might feel the forest choosing you again. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep connecting, and I will see you next time.